ice valley embraced by the Brecon beacons. And these hills have trapped the echo of tramping Roman feet. Below us, a famous mining village founded in 1875 by Evan Evans Bevan. He was going to name it after his eldest daughter, Nancy Isabella. But he had 6 other girls, and being a sensible dad, knew he couldn't prefer one over the others. So he named it after all of them, 7 sisters. And now, like the Romans, we shall march.
Coal, of course, was everything to this place, but the mining life is vivid only in the memories of elderly men. The colliery wheel, a keepsake on the village mantelpiece. Seven Sisters Pit featured in a wartime film, Silent Village, a drama set in a Britain conquered by the Nazis. The actors were local men, women and children, the miners playing themselves. The child is Arwel Michael, one of the few people in the film alive today, and these are his real parents. He knows all the characters in the film, the people he grew up with.
These are some of the miners there. Mock, Alexander, Henry John Williams, and we've got them in the showers here. This is Llew North, or Llew Jones, born in North Wales, married in Ystrygynlais in Cwmgyrdd, lived in Cwmgyrdd most of his life. And this is Sid Bowen, one of the men from Ystrygynlais again, asking for his back to be washed. Sid Bowen is quite a talented individual, quite a character.
Did your father get time off to make the film?
No, they didn't get time off at all. He was coming home from night shift and might be in bed for just half an hour, and a knock on the door, the weather was right, and they were having him out and filming then, and maybe hours and hours filming possibly, and back to work in the night again.
The union officials in the film were union men in real life.
This is Dan Evans. He was the union agent in all the area. Sid Bowen and Di Francis with the glasses, the miners' union agent for the area.
It was a harrowing film, based on the true story of Lidice in Czechoslovakia. The children taken away, the women sent to concentration camps, and the men massacred. A street of houses built by Evan Evans Bevan, more than 100 years old, neat and proudly kept. Here stood the first village school where the remarkable Griffith John was a teacher. He went to Shanghai as a missionary, and in Swansea Museum are the banners presented by his Chinese congregation to salute 50 years' service. And this is Harry George, who in 1921 broke the world skipping record, and Viv Jenkins was there.
My father was a bit of a sportsman, and so he just took me along, and my brother.
How old were you?
Oh, it's about 6 or 7, somewhere around that mark.
And what did you see?
Oh, I seen this, I knew Mr. George, and this other person from Oxford University. And of course they had all the officials there from the world records, and then they started off, and it was marvelous.
They started skipping?
Yeah, and you couldn't see the rope going round. It was so fast. And Mr. George, he'd done 17,000 in 65 minutes.
17,000 skips?
Yeah.
And what happened to the Oxford University man?
Oh, he only came as far about 8,000, I think it was. 8 or 9,000. He was well beaten. And
The case against private education.
The first chapel here was built in 1875 by a local carpenter, Ivan Thomas. I've made a profit of £10 building the chapel, he told his wife. Oh, Ivan, she said, to profit from the house of God is a sin. So the next Sunday he put the £10 into the collection plate, and he and Mrs. Thomas left the chapel with their heads held
On the road now to Hirvanith, the long hill, through landscape scarred yet still grand. Ahead, the hillside is gouged by open cast works, diggers carving out immense canyons, reaching trees that stored the sunshine 3 million years ago.
In front of us, we've got the Rhondda sandstone. It's resisted erosion from water, ice, and the big ice sheets that were here 10,000 years ago. And at the bottom of the sandstone, we've got the Rhondda number 2 coal seam. This seam is quite a famous seam. It's been worked extensively in the South Wales area. Directly beneath the Rhondda number 2 seam, we've got the Llinvi shales, and this is where we found the fossil trees. At the bottom of the Llinvi shale there, we've got the Pantry to Do coal seam, and that was another seam that was also worked at this site. What we're seeing here is one of the trees, and you can see it's quite difficult to see the tree until you're quite close to it.
Oh,
They're very well camouflaged.
I
you
can't
see
it yet.
It's the same mudstone. Here
Right.
we've got the tree.
Yes.
Okay. Now, when the tissues decayed in the tree, it was filled with mud. It's the same mud that's in the fossil as around the fossil.
Yeah. Now I can see the bark quite
That's
clearly.
right,
And this
that's
is the tree
right.
trunk going up there.
That's right. You can
Yeah.
see some of the leaf scars of the trunk. We can see some of the carbon that remains from the outer part of the tree. And if we look across the broad band of the tree here, you can see the structure of the cortex.
In the workshop, the fossils are cleaned and preserved.
Here we have a fine example of the branching system of the Lepidodendron tree. Here there's several examples of the branches, the dichotomizing branches, and it's spread over this lovely piece of mudstone that's preserved a fine detail. If you look closely at this branch here, you can see that there's leaf scars plainly preserved, and the little leaflets you can see along the side of the branch. We've also got the reproductive cones that you can see just here.
A 1,000 feet below, beyond the plantations, the Vale of Neath comes into view. And here, on the top of Hirvanith, a remarkable stone. A Celt in a kilt. A rare 9th century carving, or rather a copy, for the original is in Swansea Museum. Descending the mountain is a test of my navigation, for the winding forest roads weave Celtic patterns. But the stream knows the way, and I follow it down and make for Glyn Neath. The rugby ground, of course, is the centre of the universe, and Max Boyce, the local treasure, lives about as close as he can get. A remnant of industrial history, the old Dinas factory which made fire bricks for ironworks all over the world, and the Russian word for a furnace brick is Dinas. A short stride from Glyn Neath is Cumgrach, whose stories have been painstakingly gathered by the local historian, and he's found that being the local milkman as well is the ideal job if you want to delve into history and write a fascinating book.
It took me a long time, 7 years, to research and write the book. But I suppose one of the greatest contributions was that as a milkman working in the village, I knew most of the people well before I knocked on doors and asked for information.
The life of Eileen Egan is one of the stories he found. She wrote a biography of Mother Teresa, but little was known of the author.
She was born in Pontypridd, but came to Cumgrach as a very young girl, and she says that I spent my formative years in Cumgrach.
He found a school photograph of her and learnt that she'd spent her life working for refugees.
In 1955, she was sent to Calcutta to look into the refugee situation there. And she'd met Sister Teresa, a young nun who'd forsaken the convent in Loreto, not very far away, and taken up her life to help the dying and destitute on the streets of Calcutta.
Eileen Egan worked with Mother Teresa not only in India, but in other places where people were destitute or desperate.
I decided to write to Mother Teresa herself. A broad step, I thought. I really didn't know how to pen a letter to Mother Teresa at first, but I got around to it. Astonishingly, it wasn't very long before I had a reply, but in the negative. She couldn't help me find Eileen either.
Eventually, he traced Eileen Egan to New York and went there to talk to her, and she filled in the gaps in her story. This was just a few months before her death.
They were quite close friends, apart from the work that we were both involved in. But one particular honor which was bestowed on Mother Teresa was the Nobel Peace Prize, which was bestowed on her in 1979. When she went to receive this gift, she invited Eileen Egan to stand alongside her. So that's how close they were.
Now he's writing Eileen Egan's biography. In the churchyard at Cwmgrach, a reminder of the work that children did. The grave of John Lewis, killed in a colliery in 1855, aged 12.
There was once a vicar here who was a real Jack the Lad. The Red Priest, they called him, either because of his ginger hair or his fierce temper or both. He liked the pub as much as the pulpit, kept a Bible in one pocket and a pack of cards in the other. All this became too much for one of his parishioners, who took him to a church court in 1743 and accused him. You've been a frequenter of taverns. You quarrel and fight with your parishioners. You drank ale and played cards all of one Saturday night until 5 o'clock in the morning, and then officiated in the church, to the great danger of your soul and a sad example to all Christians.
One night, the Red Priest rode over the mountain to Thorondda, and he and his horse fell from a cliff to their deaths at a place still known as Craigafeiriad, the clergyman's rock. Crossing the Neath River, I reached the gates of Aberpergwm, once the home of the Williams family of farmers, coal masters, bankers, musicians, and philanthropists.
During the 1960s, I used to visit the late Colonel Mervyn Williams. He belonged to the last generation who actually lived in the house. And he remembered three things as a young man. First of all, that all the house servants had to speak Welsh. Secondly, the head gardener always wore a top hat and a white shirt. He didn't look like a gardener at all. And the third thing that he remembered was that from Mondays to Fridays, anyone who would take a message to a member of the Williams family, or for a member of the Williams family, to the back door of the house, was given a pint of beer, a round of beef and a slice of bread, so that the trade in messages was pretty brisk at times.
Coal made the Williamses rich, but they moved away from the mining districts a century ago for the Vale of Glamorgan. In Aberpergwm Church, memorials remind us of a cultured family. Maria and Elizabeth, who collected Welsh folk songs, and their father, William Williams, who travelled the world and came home to a life of scholarship. Local volunteers have made a lovely job of restoring 4 miles of the Neath Canal, and it makes a beautiful walk. These railings are about all that's left of Maes Gwyn. The poet Robert Southey tried to rent it in 1803, but the landlord doubted that he'd keep up the payments and said no. Following the canal near Resolven, I come to a broad meadow between the water and the hillside, the perfect setting for the local races. They're organised by the Banwen Miners' Hunt, and there are 7 races this afternoon, a good crowd, plenty of excitement, and opportunities for investment.
This race, because it started just after the war with pony racing, i.e. unrecognised horse racing under the jurisdiction of the Jockey Club. It was run outside those rules. This gave opportunity, of course, to working class people to enjoy themselves with their own race horses. Sometimes not thoroughbred horses, but nevertheless horses that could run fast.
The biggest race of the afternoon the West Wales Grand National has a prize of £300. The most celebrated horse in the history of these races was Ayr Queen, whose career was a Welsh legend.
She was a proper racehorse, undoubtedly. If she had been given the opportunity, she would have won races on major racecourses in the United Kingdom. But the owners and the connections chose to keep her to racecourses in Wales, where she was virtually unbeatable.
Yeah, well, Ayr Queen was owned by a local butcher in the village in Resolver, and Arthur Davis, trained by my father, broken in as a 2-year-old by my father, in fact. She always ran over 1.5 miles, or mainly over 1.5 miles. And I think perhaps her trademark was she'd be so far behind in every race, 40, 50 lengths behind the last horse going down the back straight. And without any encouragement from the jockey, she knew it was her turn to go, and she'd take the bit. And the whole crowd, whether they backed her or not, would be cheering home, because she'd come flying up the straight, usually to win by a length, half a length, always knowing that she'd won the race, because as soon as she'd passed the post, she'd stop very quickly, and she seemed to turn back and nod her head in appreciation of what she'd done. She was really a star.
A real character of a horse.
Oh, character, yes. She was such a docile horse in the week. You wouldn't know she was in the box. She'd be there with her head down. But come Saturday morning, when we took her out, she was a picture. She'd got to the races, out of the box, nostrils in the air, and she'd need to say, the Queen is here, and she was that character.
Now an exciting finish, and General Custer stumbles at the last fence, and River Lossy, ridden by Amanda Meakin, goes on to win. Of course, with a horse called General Custer, you don't have history on your side. From the pounding of hooves to the peace of the canal, a real ornament in the valley. The house called Creola is said to have been designed by John Nash in the early 19th century. At one time, a spacious orangery was built onto the house, and in it a gardener grew a monster pineapple, so big he sent it to the king. And that's where I'm heading, the top of the mountain ahead. In the trees I come upon an old dream, a castaway yacht built 30 years ago for a blue ocean. It never saw salt water. Resolven slips below my horizon, and I make the arduous haul through the forest to the top, along a path called St. Illtyd's Way. Tough old blighters, those Celtic saints. And the Romans were pretty tough too. This was the great road they pushed across Wales, south to their camp near Neath and north to Caernarfon. The road bears the Welsh name of San Helen. And so I follow the Romans, who tramped at 10,000 paces a day, marching through Wales, dreaming of Rome. How quickly in Wales you can slip away into the wild and exhilarating landscape. And there's the farm where Anwen Williams shows me a family gem.
This is a shawl of Glenricos that my great-great-grandmother wore to hear Howell Harris preach in Trevecca in 1745. The wool that the shawl has been made from came from sheep on the farm opposite Llytyrafel, which is on the Roman road. We don't really know what route she took, where she stayed, because I would imagine that it would have taken her more than a day to get there, as well, because there would have been so many people going to hear him preach.
A pilgrimage.
A pilgrimage, yes.
Now this is more than 250 years old.
Yes.
And it's wonderful, isn't it, that you can look after this, you can touch it and see it, and in a second or two you're connected with the past.
Yes, yes. Oh, it's precious, very precious.
I come down from the rugged mountain and find myself heading towards that other world of roads and traffic and hurry. But I dodge away to the thrilling, thunderous drama of the Aberdelyce Falls. A few inches from this astonishing torrent, a plucky little dipper nonchalantly chooses from the buffet. The relentless power of the Aberdelyce Falls has driven industries for centuries. Copper and tin plate, corn milling. Now a turbine and the water wheel produce electric power. Over the centuries, artists have flocked here like pilgrims. I end my walk at Cadoxton Church. The memorial to Robert Lation, who perished in the sinking of the Titanic, reflects something of the confusion that followed the disaster. The inscription records more than 1,600 deaths, but the official figure was finally fixed at 1,523. The date, however, is right. Although the ship struck the iceberg just before midnight on the 14th of April 1912, it didn't sink until the following day at 2:20 in the morning. In the churchyard, a murder stone.
To my mind, this stone speaks with a barely suppressed fury. It tells the story of Margaret Williams, a servant girl aged 26, who was murdered near this church in 1822, and the killer was never found. And here you can feel the outrage of the local people. It says that God has set his mark upon him for eternity. And then it adds, and the cry of blood will assuredly pursue him to certain and terrible but righteous judgment. All this was 180 years ago, but these powerful words still ring with grief, loss, and anger.
Next week, I'll be walking from the River Clwyd to the River Alyn.